What is going on, y'all? Welcome to another edition of the Liberty Cast. I'm your host, Big E. You may have seen that I posted a video for the first time in quite some time, and the subject was Garrett Rolfe and the shooting of Rayshard Brooks. We'll dig into that a little more because the video was only a minute, and then we'll talk about the swamp's attempts at gun control. We'll also critique an article in The Atlantic regarding police reform and gun control. And then we'll get into the left's attempts to erase history and a prominent politician's stunning ignorance of said history. We will get into all of that and a whole lot more straight ahead. There is a war being waged against the police right now. And some of you may have seen a video that I put up last week where I talked about specifically the issue with Garrett Rolfe and his shooting of Rayshard Brooks. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail here today because that video was only a minute. I wanted to make sure you didn't have to go through any nonsense to view the whole thing. We'll probably be doing some more longer videos up on IGTV and Twitter and things like that. But for the first one that we did in a while, I wanted to keep it as short as possible. But Officer Rolfe, he's been charged with murder, as you know, and that charge carries with it the death penalty, as you know, especially if you saw my video. Now, the fact that Brooks was drunk, fought the police, and unfortunately was winning for a while there, and that's something that I do want to get into with a little bit more detail. But he was drunk, winning the fight, stole the taser, and then attempted to use it against them. Apparently means absolutely nothing to these corruptocrats who are charging Rolfe with murder. But getting back to the fight that ensued before Brooks was shot, the fact that Brooks was winning speaks to a mindset and training issue going on with maybe not the entire Atlanta Police Department, but definitely with these two officers. And believe me, I'm not trying to criticize them in any way, because after 40 minutes of being cordial with a guy who you know you're going to arrest for DUI, it's kind of natural to ease up a bit. But I think after seeing this, most officers are probably going to be a little bit more on their guard until the cuffs are on, which is pretty much how it should be anyway. But it's understandable that didn't happen. But then once he starts fighting, there were a couple of opportunities that they could have ended it before it got to the point where they had to shoot. And I'm not trained in jiu-jitsu or grappling or anything like that, but there are techniques that you learn in defensive tactics training in the police department where, had they employed those techniques, they could have subdued him without it getting to the point where he stole a taser, started running, turned to fire the taser at them, and they had to shoot him. Right now there's this movement against using chokeholds, and I don't think people understand what they're saying when they use the term chokehold. They see somebody with an arm around a suspect's neck and immediately assume that he's being choked. And if you don't restrain the person properly with an arm around their neck, then it could slip into a chokehold, and you could potentially kill someone. So you have to know exactly what you're doing. And there are restraints called carotid restraints, which basically cuts off the blood flow to the brain for a second. You pass out. You wake up in 2, 3, 4 seconds, and by that time, the cuffs are on, fight's over. And even though, like I said, I'm not trained in jiu-jitsu or anything like that, I have been through some of that training, and I have had those restraints applied against me a number of times, and I woke immediately back up. If you watch the footage, there are a couple of opportunities where they could have done that. Now, adrenaline's flowing, he's fighting, things are happening. Like I said in another podcast, sometimes training just escapes you for a quick second. It happens. But then again, in this climate that we're in right now, there's also the very real possibility that he consciously decided not to employ that technique. But once the taser is gone, is he just supposed to give up because he forgot some of his training for a second? Of course not. Taser's gone, and now you have to deal with that threat. And once he aims and shoots that taser at you, it becomes a deadly weapon. And that's not just me. That's according to the district attorney who is charging Rolfe with murder. Because just a couple of weeks ago, this same district attorney, well, I guess it was 3 weeks ago now, but he charged 6 officers with excessive force for deploying a deadly weapon against a couple of college students.
As many of you all know, under Georgia law, a taser is considered as a deadly weapon under Georgia law.
So how is this a deadly weapon on June 2nd, but then on June 17th, it's not? And the fact that Officer Rolfe shot someone trying to use a taser against him is not justified because Rayshard Brooks posed no threat. Come on. Now, I know he saw the same video we all did because he showed part of it in this conference where he's announcing the charges against Garrett Rolfe. This is an obvious attempt to appease the mob. Because as I said in that video, you and I both know that we never would have heard about this case unless we lived in Atlanta if Officer Rolfe had been black and Rayshard Brooks had been white. Now, in the aftermath of this, in the aftermath of the announcement of charges against Rolfe, and the GBI hasn't even completed their investigation. When the charges were announced, the investigation had been underway for 2 or 3 days. But in the aftermath, a significant percentage of the Atlanta Police Department has called out sick. The blue flu seems to be running through the department. And I have absolutely no problem with it. When you look at the calls to defund or disband or reform the police, quote unquote reform, which basically means defund or disband, depending on which city you look at. And we'll get into that later on in the program. But Atlanta's getting a taste of what a limited or non-existent police force looks like. And meanwhile, Rolfe and his family are paying the price. Because here's the thing. If something comes out and it turns out that Rolfe was completely unjustified and that it was a bad shoot, I don't see how, but just suppose that is the case. Why would his family have to suffer? Well, obviously his wife and his children, they're going to have to deal with the fact that he's not going to be earning any money. He's going to be in jail. They're not going to get his pension and anything like that. That's to be expected in these cases, unfortunately. But why would his stepmother have to suffer any consequences from this? Now, Rolfe is in jail without bail, facing life in prison without the possibility of parole. And even though they say they're not going to pursue it, this charge carries with it the death penalty. And as crooked as these people are, you can't believe anything they say. But now his stepmother, she's lost her job for, quote unquote, violating company policy. And here's part of the statement that her former employer put out. Quote, Melissa Rolfe's termination was a direct result of her actions in the workplace and violation of company policy. While working with Melissa as she transitioned to a leave of absence granted by her organization, we discovered she violated company policy and created an uncomfortable working environment for many of our employees. As an HR director, she ultimately lost the confidence of her peers, leadership, and many employees who no longer felt comfortable engaging with her. We value diversity of thought and respect Melissa's personal views and the views of all employees. However, when those views create a hostile working environment, we must make difficult decisions to part ways. Please, come on. They say in the statement she was transitioning to a leave of absence. How hostile can the work environment be if she's not going to be there? Come on. They claim that she posted something on social media. The only thing that I found in any reports was that she posted a link to a GoFundMe page or something like that. Come on. And the fact that they put in there that they respect diversity of thought and other people's views, is telling. And that tells me that she said something, she did something that somebody didn't like, that somebody opposed. So if you're going to fire somebody as they're going on a leave of absence because of a viewpoint that they hold, how much can you possibly respect diversity of thought? Now, other than that, there's been no other explanation. So I'm forced to conclude, and I think most reasonable people would be forced to conclude, that this has to do with her relationship, her association with Garrett Rolfe. And so this is where we're at now, punishing people for what their families are accused of doing. Now, we already talked about the consequences of if this turns out to be a bad shoot and his family has to deal with recouping the loss of his income and his being there and all that. I understand that. I get it. But his stepmother? What kind of sense does that make? All right, y'all, we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we're going to get into something that I feel like we haven't spent enough time on lately, and we're going to talk about the Second Amendment and the left's continued attempts at taking our gun. So stick around, and we'll see you on the other side. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So in that cesspool, that swamp rat habitat known as Washington, D.C., not only have they renamed a street in front of the White House Black Lives Matter Plaza and painted the name in big yellow letters on the street, but they've also figured out a way to legally ban guns. Now, of course, obviously banning guns is not legal, but they figured out a way to do it, or at least slow walk it to such a degree that it is effectively a ban. So earlier this year in March, the only gun store that handled FFL transfers in the city of Washington, D.C., they pieced out. They left residents no way to get their legally purchased firearms transferred. And I don't blame them, because I am certain, I'm not familiar with all the circumstances behind why they left, but I'm certain that the city of D.C. did not make it easy for them to do business. But when they left, there was no one available to do these transfers. So the D.C. Police Department stepped in and they obtained an FFL so that they could complete these transfers. And that sounds fantastic. Well, several people have purchased firearms in that time, and they've gotten no response. They've gotten no response from the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department. The guns have been shipped back to the post office. In some cases, the guns have been shipped back to the place where they were purchased. I mean, D.C. is notoriously anti-gun. And I guess they thought that getting the FFL would buy them some goodwill, but their agenda is obvious. And I suspect that people who lived in D.C. probably saw through it, knew that this was not going to be a good thing. They don't want you to have guns, and they are doing their level best to keep you from getting them. I mean, this is just inviting legal action, and I'm hoping that it happens sooner rather than later, because this is what they're doing is clearly unconstitutional. The ability to legally obtain a firearm is being rendered moot right now by the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, because they got that FFL and then stuck it in a drawer with clearly no intention to ever use it. And what I fear most is that someone will die waiting to get their firearm because they didn't have it by their side to protect themselves from a threat, like what happened to that woman in New Jersey. But I don't think these leftists care. I don't think they will lose a wink of sleep if someone dies because they didn't have a firearm to protect themselves. They couldn't care less. Now, another thing I wanted to touch on, there was an article in The Atlantic, that left-wing rag, The Atlantic, where the author calls for police reform, and he asserts that the police on the street are exhibiting a warrior mentality that is inappropriate. But then at the same time, he's calling for these ridiculous gun control measures, and that the reason that the warrior mentality in policing is prevalent is due to the abundance and availability of guns. Now, the first thing that jumped out at me was that this guy has no idea what a warrior truly is. I was in the military. I have a law enforcement background, and I know guys who served in some elite military and police units. These guys are the most badass, yet gentle people you would ever meet. These are the guys that you never want to have to engage in a fight, but they also would never seek one out because they know what they can do. The true warrior mentality is one that seeks to protect. They're the sheepdogs. They know that they have the strength. They know that they have the ability to do damage if necessary. But they only use that when it is absolutely necessary. And to me, and I think to most reasonable people, that's what you want in a police officer. Because what's the alternative? The author claims that the warrior training is inappropriate and we need to demilitarize the police. No more SWAT. So who are they going to call when assailants armed with AR-15s and AKs or fully automatic weapons like they had back in 97 when they robbed that bank? Or if they just riot in the streets like what's going on right now? Who are they going to call? Social workers? Just let them blow off steam like they did in Baltimore? Come on. That's ridiculous. But in light of this ridiculous police reform that they're calling for, or disbanding the police, they also are trying to reduce the number of guns because, as the author asserts in this piece, the prevalence of guns contributes to that warrior mentality that they hate so much. And I disagree with that completely. I mean, they want to turn this country into a nation of betas, which it is just ridiculous. But anyway, in typical leftist fashion, he tries to make one of their favorite cases, the one that they use quite often, and that is that more guns equates to more crime. He cites this 2013 study in the American Journal of Public Health, where they find that for each percentage point increase in gun ownership, the homicide rate increases by nearly an identical amount, by 0.9%. And they claim they control for other factors and things like that, saying that there is a statistically significant correlation between the availability of guns and violent crime. And they claim that this is across the spectrum of incomes. I haven't looked at this study in depth. I haven't looked at the methodology, the crosstabs, anything like that. I'm interested in seeing how they came to that conclusion. But the statistics, the basic statistics, FBI uniform crime reports, any actual statistics that you look at don't bear this out. Because, and this is the best part, because in the same article, he goes on to talk about how violent crime is down 70% since 1993. And in that same time frame, gun sales have skyrocketed such that twice as many guns as people have been added in that time frame. So, again, which is it? The left loves to try and have it both ways. Do more guns equal more crime or not? Now, this 2013 study says yes, but FBI uniform crime reports say no. Crime is down 70%. But he points to another famous leftist anti-gun talking point here, and that is the gun show loophole or the private sale loophole. And for that ridiculousness, he cites a study by Deborah Azrael, who claims that 40% of gun owners got their most recent firearm without a background check. Really? 40%? Now, even if you take into account private sales, trades, inheritances, that kind of thing, even if you take all that into account, that still seems ridiculously high. And guess what? It is. Because she arrived at that conclusion by surveying 2,072 gun owners. We don't know where she got these gun owners. We don't know what states, if they're all from the same area. We know nothing other than that there are 2,072 gun owners. If you dig into the data, that information may be there, but from what I could see, I couldn't find that. But either way, with close to 400 million guns in private hands, you only surveyed 2,100 people and think that you're going to get an accurate statistic, an accurate measure of how many people actually got their guns without a background check? There are an estimated 1.1 million legal gun owners in the United States. 2,100 people is statistically irrelevant. And the fact that she would publish that is insane to me. Absolutely ridiculous. But here's the other thing, and this is something that none of these anti-constitutional gun confiscation advocates talk about. How do you enforce this? How do you enforce draconian gun control measures if you're trying to reduce the police force or disband it in some cases altogether? You're just going to have some social worker walk up to a legal gun owner's home and say, yeah, give me your guns? No, that's not going to work. The military? National Guard? What? Because whoever enforces this is going to have to use what in order to do it? If you guess gun, you would be right. And this goes back to something else we always talk about. They never address the then what. They give these grandiose, these pie in the sky notions, these plans that sound great, that are going to bring about the leftist utopia that they want. But then what? How are they going to get there? They never, ever have thought that far ahead. All right, real quick before we take another break and then get you out of here. Caitlin Ratty, who is a survivor of the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. She wrote an op-ed earlier this month where she talked about how people on the left who are now starting to buy guns because they see all of the civil unrest and want to be able to protect themselves and their families. She wrote an op-ed where she asserts that these people are not and should not feel as though they're hypocrites. To a certain extent, she's right. There are some liberals who supported the right to keep and bear arms, but didn't want one for themselves, but now feel like the way things are going, they want to be able to protect themselves and their families against whatever threats may be coming their way. And those people are not hypocrites. The hypocrites are the hardcore leftists, like Alyssa Milano, who is famously anti-gun, but has admitted that she owns a couple of firearms. She is, and people like her, are hypocrites. People like that who don't want you to be able to own guns or want to make the restrictions and licensing requirements so onerous that you can't, or want to tax ammunition and tax firearms such that you won't be able to afford it. Those people are the hypocrites. I'm not going to bother linking to it because it's a poorly written piece. She's got all kinds of factual errors. She talks about the myth of a good guy with a gun stopping a bad guy with a gun. She invokes the Black Panther Party and the Mulford Act and claims that the Mulford Act was racist, which it was not. And we can get into that another time. But she's giving voice to a point that a lot of people are trying to make, in that just because they're on the left of the political spectrum doesn't mean that they are hypocrites for wanting to protect themselves and their families with a firearm. The Second Amendment doesn't care if you're conservative or liberal, doesn't care if you're black or white. The Second Amendment is there for Americans. And like I said, liberals, some liberals who actually have supported the Second Amendment, they're not hypocritical at all. It's these other people, like Caitlin Ratty, who admitted that she's thinking about buying a firearm in this piece. But it's like a stream of consciousness, internal dialogue where she's trying to talk herself into believing that she's not a hypocrite for wanting a firearm. Anyway, let's go ahead and take a break, and when we get back, we're going to address the attempted erasure of history, and then get you out of here with some dazzling stupidity. History is not meant to be politically correct. History is not meant to be nice and polite. Erasing history is dangerous. It's there to teach us so that we can learn from the mistakes that we make, whatever they might be, so that we don't repeat them. Otherwise, you forget what pain those mistakes cause. And let's face it, human beings are flawed. Whatever mistakes we make, we make them because at that particular point in time, those actions seem like the right thing to do, or the rewards appear to outweigh the risk. If we intentionally erase the past so that we have no reference point, we have nothing to examine and say, well, we tried that before and it didn't work, we'll fall right back into those same traps. Now, statues of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson have been torn down in Portland. The statue of George Washington was toppled with an American flag burning over his head. And the statue of Thomas Jefferson was torn down as well.
No, George Washington was a slave owner. Was George Washington a slave owner? So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down, are we going to take down statues to George Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson? What do you think of Thomas Jefferson? You like him? Okay, good. Are we going to take down the statue? Because he was a major slave owner. Now, are we going to take down his statue? So you know what? It's fine. You're changing history, you're changing culture, and you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay?
That seemed far-fetched 3 years ago, didn't it? Yet here we are. And in San Francisco, they tore down the statue of Ulysses S. Grant, the general who commanded the Union Army in the Civil War. I mean, and not only that, but as president in 1871, he signed into law the Civil Rights Act of 1871, which allowed him to use force, which allowed him to use the military to fight the Ku Klux Klan. At this point, it's as much about just destruction as it is about erasing history. Now, circling back to a point we made earlier, which is turning into an evergreen topic on this show, what's next? What happens if we play this out to its logical conclusion? When we said that they were going to tear down statues of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln, everybody's like, no, that'll never happen. Yet, like I said, here we are. Now, the Confederate statues, obviously, they've been on the chopping block for a while. But we thought that Washington and Jefferson and Lincoln and Grant were safe. Now, frankly, I'm surprised they haven't tried to rename Columbia University yet, because you know that Christopher Columbus was such a monster, which is, again, completely untrue. more evidence of a lack of knowledge of history. When he landed in the West Indies, he instructed his men not to take advantage of the natives. In fact, he adopted a child from there and raised it as his own. Even after one of the more violent tribes in the West Indies took down one of the settlements and burned the buildings, he instructed his people to show restraint and not retaliate. Anyway, I digress. But Yale University was named after a slave trader named Elihu Yale, and I'm sure I butchered his name, but regardless, it's only a matter of time before that and other institutions are renamed, if not burned to the ground, considering how violent these folks have become. What's to stop them from claiming that the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution are now invalid? Other than the fact that it would expose their glaring lack of knowledge of our history, nothing. And they don't obviously care about that. I mean, we've talked before about how the founders were against slavery and sought to abolish it. It's actually in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. That was a reference to slavery and how they were against it, which is actually a perfect segue into this next story, because the left is trying to cancel history. And now you have Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben, and Cream of Wheat. The faces of those products are black folks. And Aunt Jemima, after 130 years of having this black woman as the face of the brand, and yes, the origins of the Aunt Jemima logo are steeped in racism. There's no getting around that. If you look back at the original, the very first Aunt Jemima logo, it was based on a minstrel show. So, obviously there was something there then. But I would think that they addressed this the last time that they changed the logo back in 1993, making Aunt Jemima an Oprah lookalike. I guess not. Now, a man by the name of Larnell Evans Sr. is not happy with this canceling of Aunt Jemima because he is her great-grandson. And part of his response is, quote, "She worked for that Quaker Oats for 20 years. She traveled all the way around the United States and Canada making pancakes as Aunt Jemima for them. This woman served to all those people, and it was after slavery. She worked as Aunt Jemima. That was her job. How do you think I feel as a black man sitting here telling you about my family history they're trying to erase?" Wow. They never look at the then what. Now, following suit, Mars, the company that produces Uncle Ben's rice, is about to change their name and logo too. Now, from what I can see, there are no ties to slavery for Uncle Ben's rice. The likeness that was used for Uncle Ben's was that of the maitre d' of a restaurant in Chicago by the name of Frank Brown. Now, the company launched in 1943. The owner, he'd been selling rice to the military and wanted to take his company nationwide. 120 years or so after slavery ended. Now, the model for the Cream of Wheat logo was a man by the name of Frank White. He was an immigrant from Barbados in 1875, became a naturalized citizen in 1890. Why is that problematic? What you're telling me is black people can't be the face of products anymore because it's racist, which makes absolutely no sense. The woke crowd has gotten completely out of control. We have the statues of the founders. We have black models who are the faces of products. What's next? Mount Rushmore? Now, we know that's insane. But 3 years ago, we thought that taking down statues of Thomas Jefferson and George Washington was insane, yet here we are. Okay, this is going to be the last story of the day, but I really wanted to get this in. So last week on the Senate floor, Tim Kaine, the senator from Virginia, made a complete and total ass of himself.
And we need to do much more. within the criminal justice system, but also within all of our systems, to dismantle the structures of racism that our federal, state, and local governments carefully erected and maintained over centuries. We know a little bit about this in Virginia. The first African Americans into the English colonies came to Point Comfort, Virginia in 1619. They were slaves. They'd been captured against their will, but they landed in colonies that didn't have slavery. There were no laws about slavery in the colonies at that time. The United States didn't inherit slavery from anybody. We created it. It got created by the Virginia General Assembly and the legislatures of other states. It got created by the court systems in colonial America and since that enforced fugitive slave laws. We created it. And we created it and maintained it over centuries.
Erroneous! Erroneous! Erroneous on both counts.
Erroneous on every count. Has this man read a history book, taken a history class, used Google? Does he not know that the United States was not yet formed in 1619? We were British colonies up until 1776. Nearly 160 years later was the United States formed. So by definition, we inherited it from the British. But aside from that, does he not understand that the United States Navy was established to combat the Barbary pirates who were capturing our ships and holding the crews for ransom or, wait for it, selling them into slavery? I mean, I guess if you went to a bad public school, you may or may not know some of that coming out of high school. But this guy came within a hair's breadth of being the vice president. He served as the mayor of Richmond, lieutenant governor and governor of Virginia, and now he's a sitting U.S. senator from the state of Virginia. You would think that at some point he would have come across those facts by accident or something. But to go on the Senate floor and make such an utter buffoon of yourself, I mean, he's a Democrat, so I guess it shouldn't be that surprising, but come on. Even a Democrat has to be better than that. Well, do they? Maybe not. Anyway, folks, that is our show. I do want to thank you for spending this time with me. Please, if you like what you hear, subscribe. Go to your favorite podcast platform, subscribe, leave a review, let us know what you think. You can find us on the website, thelibertycast.net. We're also on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Parler. I'm not calling it Parlay anymore because nobody does. Parler. It's at the Liberty Cast on all four of those platforms. And you can also find us on therightway.site. Go to their podcast page and you'll find us there as well. And we've gotten a lot of traffic over the past few weeks, and a lot of it looks like it's coming from the rightway.site. So I want to thank the folks over at the Right Way for giving us that boost. I really appreciate it. But again, folks, thank you all for listening. And until next time, keep your head on a swivel and stay safe, everybody.